Okay, so I just got back from the ironing board, and as you can see, I have my my shoulder seam on my bodice pressed nicely together. And if you go ahead and just flip this around and lay it flat, you can hopefully see the front of the bodice begin to take shape with the neckline in the center front. And then we can see our center back here. And then what we need to do is we need to line up our facing with the right sides together along this neckline opening. So the first place that you need to start is with your shoulder seam. And what you're going to want to do is make sure that this shoulder seam that you created with your facing lines up directly over top of that, that seam line on your bodice. And what you can do, and this is just my personal tip, is you can put a needle straight through the facing shoulder seam line, and hopefully it'll pop out directly opposite of your bodice shoulder seam line. Make sure all that stuff is out of the way, and then you can run your needle straight down, run your pin straight down through that seam line, and then pop it up on the front side, and hopefully that'll just keep all of your seams lined up when we go to stitch. So what you're going to want to do from here is then work towards the front and towards the back, just putting all these pins in place, attaching and lining up these raw edges here. So I'm just going to go ahead and put a few pins in, and I'm gonna put a pin in fairly close to that shoulder seam because I want to make sure that my seam allowances are going to be flat the entire time. So by putting a pin on both sides of that shoulder seam, making sure that I catch that seam allowance on both the front and the back, it's double checking and making sure that all of my seam allowances will be laying flat in my next seam that I sew. So I'm just going to go ahead and keep putting some pins in all the way around this neckline edge. Making sure the key is here, we just want to make sure that all of our raw edges are lined up along this around this curved neckline area. Alright, and I'm going to come back to the center back, and I'm going to work my way back here, making sure everything is matched up. All those raw edges are matched up. And then I have a marking on my center back. I don't know if you can see it there in the video, but it's 5/8 of an inch in. I have a little clip out, and that's where I want my stitch line to stop. Okay? So that's where I'm going to stop there. And if you think about it, I'll undo this real quick, because if we put our zipper in, our zipper is going to stop right here. So then what we'll need to do is, after we go ahead and flip this, we'll want to attach it in a different way. So what we're going to want to do is not stitch all the way to this open edge. We want to stop at 5/8 of an inch in, 5/8 inch inward from that center back. So we're stopping right at the center back seam. If you look at your pattern, let me pull that out real quick. So here's our center back seam right here, and this is our extension that would then be folded under for like our zipper placement to be put in. So that's where we're actually gonna start our stitch line. So I have my pin marking that here, and I'm gonna line up my raw edge with that 5/8 inch seam allowance, and I'm gonna go ahead and kind of extend that fabric forward so that when I lower my needle, it's going right into where I have that pin marking things. And I'm going to go ahead and do a quick back tack just to make sure that everything is going to be secure. And then I want to just, it's going to be kind of a tight corner here when I get up to this point, but I want to make sure that that raw edge runs right along that 5/8 inch. Hang on, did I say 5/8? Oh shoot. Take that back out. Because if we look at our patterns, it's actually only 1/4 inch. I thought that was looking a little narrow, or a little too wide for what we needed. We'll still do it 5/8 of an inch in, but only 1/4 inch away. I go ahead and I'm just like, oh, this looks so small. This seam is going to be such a big seam in here. But now that it's at 1/4 inch, and this is why, you know, having your patterns handy is helpful. And especially for some of you that will be advancing on to the upper classes, when you get into making your own patterns, you know, you decide a lot of that stuff. There's standards that you typically follow, but you want to make sure that you are fully aware of where all your seam allowances are. So, apologize, we'll jump right back in. So again, I still have that marking at 5/8 of an inch inward, but we're stitching at a 1/4 inch around the neckline. So I'm running this raw edge around my 1/4 inch seam, which will be a lot better for trying to stitch this tight corner. So again, I'm going to go ahead and lower my needle and do a quick back tack to make sure that everything stays in place. Okay. And I'm just going to go slowly around this edge. And as I need to, hopefully you guys can see that I'm pulling this fabric down because I really want to try to keep this seam as straight as possible for me to line everything up. So I'm just going to manipulate my fabric around and try to keep that 1/4 inch seam allowance as consistent as I can. I think I got a pin stuck, so I'm just going to stop and raise my presser foot up. Alright, almost to the center front. And when I get to center front, I'm just going to go ahead and do a quick back tack on there. And I can go ahead and trim my thread tails. Alright, now I can remove all my other pins out of the way here. And hopefully when you look at this curve line here, around the edge, hopefully it's fairly consistent. Consistency is always key when we are stitching, because if we get too far off, things will not match up in the long run. So next thing that we want to do is, and hopefully you remember this from earlier, is whenever we have a curve, we want to come in and do some clipping. We can clip in, which is a straight cut inward, or we can actually notch, which is to remove a triangle piece of fabric. So I'm going to do a notch out right at my shoulder seam because there's quite a bit of extra bulk fabric there. So I'm just going to take a triangle out there, and I'm just going to clip in here. Okay, and I'm going to do some more clipping. And hopefully you took some time to read the pages that were before this in your construction packet, because it talked about trimming and grading. And whenever you have a facing, there's usually some extra bulk involved. So to trim something is to kind of trim off the edge of your fabric at equal length. So we have multiple layers of fabric here that we are trimming off at equal lengths. And then there's something that is also called grading. And grading is when you have multiple layers of fabric that you trim at unequal lengths. So I'm going to come back in and just trim a little bit more of my my facing piece off of the edge. I'm just going to do a quick demonstration there. Hopefully you can see that my bodice part of that seam is longer than my my facing piece, and I know that it's my facing piece because it has that interfacing fused to the wrong side of it. So I'm going to go ahead and just come back and do that same thing. I'm going to make sure that I trim all the way around, so equal levels, and then I'm going to grade and just trim down only my facing piece. So just a little bit, maybe about a 1/16 of an inch. And it's not a whole lot when we're working with such a small seam allowance here, but you know, I'm sure that hopefully some of you guys remembered when you were working on your skirt projects that, you know, you were trimming out quite a bit because you were working with a 5/8 inch seam allowance. So because we're using these smaller half scale patterns, we want to reduce our seam allowance in certain areas too. I feel like I'm struggling to trim some of this. Maybe if I come at it from a different angle, I can get it taken care of better. And these aren't really things that, like, you know, taking all these little steps, these aren't things that, you know, I can particularly see, but by taking the time to do them, your garment will lay a lot nicer. You won't have this excess bulk that's kind of creeping up. Okay, So now what we have is we have this seam, everything has been trimmed and graded out of the way. And the next step that we need to do is we need to go to the ironing board and press these seam allowances that we just stitched. Even though they're very tiny, we're going to press these up into the facing so that we can do a row of understitching. So I'm going to stop the video and then just make sure that you press these seam allowances from the wrong side up into the facing area.